Welcome to the November edition of This Month in Cyber. This is, I guess, the last one for the year until we head into 2020. December gets a little busy at the end of the month, as you can imagine, with holidays and vacations. So it certainly doesn't mean that security will take a month off, but we'll take a month off from providing this webinar. We find this webinar a great way to kind of stay on top of stories that have occurred throughout the month and try to break them down into things that are, what does it mean to a small or medium-sized organization, and how are things sort of interrelated. So without further ado, let's jump into some of the topics for the month. And there we go. All right, we always throw up the graphic of NIST cybersecurity framework just to kind of frame our conversation around security. Reminds us about that detection of events is a portion of the security puzzle, but obviously also we need to be able to react equal to prevention. So we can't put all of our eggs in the prevention basket. And then most importantly, we do need to prioritize through the identify phase what the assets are that we're chartered to protect. Some of the news stories we're going to be topics we're going to be talking about this month were our proverbial phishing. We're going to be talking about patching, which can be a boring topic, but I'm going to hope to bring some light to that. Ransomware, as well as we're going to talk through some solution reviews. We are pulling from a number of stories this month. Don't be overwhelmed by what you see there. You'll obviously get this in PDF format as part of the blog post afterwards, which will allow you to click on some of these just to kind of see where some of the sources are, maybe drill into some detail on some stories that might be of some interest to you. We pull from a lot of different sources as we kind of go through this. From one of the first topics we wanted to kind of chat through was on phishing. Now, phishing, the interesting story that occurred this month is Akamai, who is an organization that does a lot of the DNS and web hosting and reporting back relative to the internet, found that 56% of phishing sites, meaning these are malicious sites, they leverage Google Analytics. And they leverage Google Analytics specifically to make their campaigns regarding phishing more effective. They do this with tying together, unique identifiers between phishing sites. As you can imagine, some of these phishing sites are related and maybe even produced by some of the same cyber criminals to begin with. But equally, they share information about who's visiting, how are you becoming effective, and they use Google Analytics to look at like browser, your location, your operating system, who are the types of targets that this campaign might be more effective for. Use statistics like page views and where location you're coming from and who's referring you in and where, the best effectiveness. And all of this machine learning and analytics data, the summary statement that I really liked out of this was the following. Akamai was basically saying the best defense against the analytics that phishing is using is more analytics. And so with that sort of as a backdrop from the November story on phishing, I wanted to kind of make sure that you were aware of how machine learning and analytics can be used to help you. There are solutions that are out there. The one in particular I'm focused on here is labeled Microsoft Office 365 ATP. And this solution has always looked at, what emails are coming into your inbox, what is the relationship between that email and the sender of that email and you. And it's also looked at kind of patterns. And it's tried to derive through machine learning and other heuristics as to whether you were being impersonated or whether your domain was being impersonated, and it was trying to assist you in that. As of recent, they have added in some new capabilities to look beyond that and actually look at what activities are being done after that email. So what activities, are they strange activities? Are you sending a lot of spam from that address now? And so what they want you to do is so basically surfacing even more information as the analytics build out and they learn more about how to detect patterns of problems. And specifically, I wanted to call out the items in highlight in the bottom right are items that they want you to do relative to this email, right? They want you to look at that mailbox and obviously change the password, but also remove delegates and disable OWA items and things of that nature. That list of activities is exactly what our service desk is doing literally on a daily basis for organizations that are on our Office 365 security plan. We are surfacing this using technology, but then somebody needs to take responses for organizations that are having, impersonations that are actively going on. So this occurs quite frequently, and our desk has been helpful and instrumental in helping our customers through that. The topic of patching. So let's kind of start with an overview. I always like Krebs' overview. He comes out with this blog each month, and in summary for you, I'll just say this month was a particularly bad month, although maybe just kind of average. Really, 74 Microsoft flaws were fixed. 15 of them are critical, and you might be wondering, critical sounds pretty urgent, but here's literally how they define critical. Weaknesses that are exploitable to install malware without any action on the part of the user. So this would include like drive-by browsing to a hacked or malicious website, right? Just visiting the site, or worse, obviously, opening a booby-trapped file attachment. 5 of these critical vulnerabilities were in the Hyper-V hypervisor. There's some in Internet Explorer and some in Office for Mac. Other overview items, usually Adobe comes out with their patches on the exact same day, and they sort of release them with Microsoft. That's been a trend. However, they kind of skipped the last 2 months for some reason, and then out of band said, oh yeah, last month Adobe Reader, which most of us commonly have, had 67 vulnerabilities that were fixed last month. So, I don't know why the poor communication on Adobe's part, but in general, definitely need to get your Adobe patches installed too. Google Chrome browsers, which have 75% market share, also had a few vulnerabilities this month. So that's your overview of patching, right? Just kind of setting the table a little bit. But I want to draw in a particular reference to something called BlueKeep. If you haven't read about it or not aware of it, now would be the time to kind of perk up your ears. Microsoft is screaming from the hilltops regarding this patch. The reason they are doing so is this actually was fixed and patched back in April timeframe. But long story short is because people have either long patching cycles or we're ignoring this, here's what Microsoft is seeing. Quote unquote, BlueKeep can be used to build wormable, which is self-spreading malware. Last weekend, last weekend means I think 2 weeks ago at this point, BlueKeep was seen being used in the wild, and it was weaponizing with a very minor piece of malware called a crypto miner. And the belief is that this is just being done as a test for a real payload to be done later. BlueKeep specifically only impacts Windows 7, Windows Server 2008, and 2008 R2. As I had mentioned, the patches are available since mid-May. They're at record as of the publishing of the article. There are 700,000 internet-connected Windows systems that are vulnerable to this, meaning just under 1 million devices that are ready to be exploited right now. They're internet connected. They can be seen with any tool that goes out and runs and looks at these. So now it's just a matter of someone finding what payload they'd like to deliver to these machines to deliver pain. Microsoft actually, due to the severity of this, actually made patches available for Windows XP, Vista, and Server 2003, even though they're no longer supported, just because they were concerned about its ability to also impact those systems. So I guess I just wanted to kind of put that one on your radar screen. It's a big one. Maybe you should even report on what your position is relative to that patch that needs to be installed on systems, especially for internet-related, internet-facing devices. Windows 7. So patching in the Windows 7 space. So a year ago, I pulled up a slide that I had presented in this month in cybersecurity, and this was the footprint at that time where Windows 7 still outranked Windows 10 a year ago, or a little over a year ago. Those numbers have changed. Okay, and fortunately, Windows 10 has now overtaken 45% versus 34% for Windows 7 market share. That said, almost 35% of the desktops are still running Windows 7. Windows 7 will not be receiving any patches in 45 days. There was a poll of businesses done, 500 businesses, and basically 60% of them still had some users that were in the process of migration, but probably would not be complete. And 23% of them expected to not make the Windows 7 end of life deadline with their workstations internally. So, the gist of it is Windows 7 is going to exist, hopefully not in your organization, but potentially in your organization after the deadline where no patch becomes available to it. There are threats that can take advantage of this, such as BlueKeep. You can kind of put the math together, right? That something highly exploitable may be coming down, and Windows 7 again remains to be unpatched and might not have patches available after that date. So, we assume that cyber criminals obviously will learn about this and will, tend to attract that. So, more details regarding this, but I guess what we want to really cover is, okay, at this point, it's getting a little too late to move an entire organization to Windows 10. What are the options, right? There's got to be some options. And so that's what I thought we'd spend a minute or two walking through. The options are still crystallizing as we go through this, but let's walk through. Effectively, there are 3 options for you if you find yourself in a situation where you have Windows 7. The key to this might be to get something called extended service updates. So extended service updates are a very special, basically it's patches, but they're being provided on a fee base as opposed to just as part of the regular cycle. So how do you get into one of these fee-based programs? Well, first and foremost, you can just buy them. We provider, and we are eligible to sell you extended service updates. We do not even have pricing on this yet. It is not available. It will be available on 12/1, and so it's sort of last minute, but so is the idea of not being on Windows 7 and not having a plan as we go into 2020. So I'm thinking the pricing will be around $50 per machine. It will be sold in annual increments, and you would need to buy it for all of your machines. So count up your number of machines, think 50 or budget 50, and we'll see what the actual pricing is on 12/1. That's the buy option. The subscribe option is a different option where essentially you can subscribe to something called Windows 10 Enterprise E5. By doing so, even though you're subscribing to Windows 10 E5, even if you don't have intentions to go to Windows 10, they'll provide you 1 year of free extended service updates for Windows 7. So hopefully that makes sense. And I have another slide on that specific subscribe option next. And the third option, which we have not seen many employ, but certainly is capable of doing this, is moving your Windows 7 workload into Azure. If you're running a desktop out of Azure, even a Windows 7 desktop, it is provided 3 years of free extended service updates. So buy, subscribe, and move. Those are your 3 options for Windows 7. Now I move you to this next slide. Again, you'll have these slides afterwards, kind of depending on what your situation is today in the left column. If you don't own the Windows 7 license, or maybe it's really tied to your hardware, I mean, certainly you can go out and buy Windows 10. It oftentimes comes pre-installed on some devices, but usually that is in the Pro model. So some organizations, many organizations like to get into the enterprise model to take advantage of some features, but long story short is I put together this little grid to help you understand that depending on your situation, you can go out and purchase Windows 10 licenses. Now the only one that's going to get you the extended service updates so you can stay on Windows 7 is the one that's highlighted there. And that Windows 10 Enterprise E5 is $11 per month. And that's essentially a subscription license and includes those extended service updates. So I'll leave it at that, but those are some financial options to overcome the fact that Windows 7 will not have any patches. When you're moving to Windows 10, there's some things to think about, right? From a design perspective, these often drive whether you prefer to have a Pro or an Enterprise licensing, as some of these are not eligible under Pro. There's, in addition to design questions, there's how are you going to get the desktops upgraded? There's refreshes, replaces, in places. There's unique situations such as maybe the ability to have Road Warrior or kiosk machines, things of that nature. So know that our organization has done thousands, if not 100,000 of desktop deployments to Windows 10. There is some planning and some deployment that needs to go into it, but in addition to the licensing. We also had a conversation in our security group around patching of Windows 2003. There's a lot of customers that kind of believe, hey, I've got these Windows 2003 machines and I haven't had any problems with it. It's not broken, so I'm not going to fix it. Or I've got this one legacy app and it's just running on Windows 2003. I just can't seem to get it out of my environment. So their thought is that because I haven't had any problems, I'm not in a insecure situation. And I guess the reality from our perspective is the following. We think that Windows 2003 ties your hands, right? It restricts things like your domain functional levels or what authentication you can offer within your domain. We think that the oftentimes the effort to remove that server or to isolate that server, can you make it is it a member of the domain today? Is it part of the subnet? We think that the effort to isolate that is oftentimes larger than the pain of just going through an upgrade and or providing some workarounds rather than isolation. Oftentimes the tools that are used to support the antivirus, the backup, your knowledge in-house to support an operating system at this point that is quite old and well past any patchable scenario is a bit of a risk. And obviously there's a very large surface area for a server. It's got old protocols on there that oftentimes are no longer even leveraged, and a large attack surface where DLL libraries and SNMP. So we implore you to kind of look around as to what your options are for your Windows 2003 servers that might still be in there too. All right, on to a different topic of ransomware. A few little nuggets here. There was a very large outbreak of ransomware that occurred with a web hosting company called SmarterASP. They have 440,000 web hosted customers. Okay, on a Friday afternoon, as I've mentioned before, it oftentimes happens on Friday. All of their essentially their own systems as well as the systems of their customers were locked up with ransomware. It was actually called Snatch ransomware, which is pretty dangerous stuff, if you will, tough to overcome. The server recovery efforts were going slow as of last discussion. Did hear that many customers did not have access to their accounts and their data. It also included back-end databases that were being hosted on there. This is the third web hosting partner that has been hit this year. Web hosting partners tend to be pretty attractive because they've got a lot of skin in the game, a lot of people that they offer this to. There's a lot of data all in one spot. In terms of the largest web hoster actually paid, and this was earlier this year, paid $1.3 billion. I'm sorry, 1.1 million dollars, 1.3 billion won, which is South Korean money, but $1 million of bitcoins to a hacker earlier this year. So web hosting providers, where's your data, and hopefully you were not impacted by this outbreak. But kind of continuing on that, we also had a customer this month that unfortunately, when I say customer, an acquaintance, someone who we had originally done some work for, especially had their SharePoint server and server farm was specifically attacked. So as I've mentioned before, ransomware can often be weaponized, and its goal is to go attack areas of pain. And in this particular case, they chose SharePoint, which had a significant amount of data on it. It was a weaponized strain that was pointed just at their SharePoint servers, and very similar to what we've seen before, an RDP port was their method of access afterwards. And so, as we've mentioned earlier, we have a service that looks for open RDP ports, and especially reports on new RDP ports that are being opened, which is usually an indicator of compromise. We also had another strain of ransomware come out that is causing particular concern. The Pure Locker, as it's called, leverages something called Pure Basic as a code underneath the hood. Pure Basic is typically not used because A, it's pretty expensive to develop in it, but the advantages that that this ransomware will have as it's still coming to fruition is that security vendors will struggle to generate reliable detection signatures for it, and it will be transferable between Windows, Linux, and OS X. So it will smartly and craftily move between platforms to really cause an organizational pain across their Windows and Linux on the back end. Now, this is being offered as ransomware as a service, meaning we can go hire an organization to go deploy this. They will target databases, but it really looks to be designed for criminals who know what they're doing and kind of targeting large organizations. Kind of on a lighter note, on this ransomware as a service, I guess I parallel this next story with what I'll call Ginsu knives, right? The idea that, hey, here's our knife set, and but wait, that's not all, right? So first they kind of offer you a low price, and then they kind of throw in and sweeten the deal until they finally closed. Well, along with that, this ransomware as a service, as I mentioned earlier, is being used for there's the people that create the software, and they do a good job, just like any software developer, of trying to make sure it's effective and that it's got good code to it and it's kind of a tightly written package. And then there are the folks that actually deploy the software. These could be cyber criminal rings, but these are people that are taking advantage of other exploits. And then there's, I'll call it ourselves, or commercial organizations that are typically the customers and the targets, if you will, for this. So there is this absolute hierarchy, and typically creators are earning 30 or 40% of the ransomware payment. Well, in this particular strain, which is called Buron, they're offering it at 25%, right? Lower margins, they'll give you discounts, in fact, if you're a very effective deployer of the software. So its starting price is low, but wait, that's not all. This software also offers to do all the great things, right? Scans local drives and network paths. It has optional features, including the encryption of files without changing extensions. So you can't see the fact that the file changed, which is usually a trigger that something's happening. It can remove recovery points and clearing logs, which is good stuff, right? You don't want people to be able to restore from their files. It has backup catalog deletion and a means to self-delete at the end. And so if that wasn't all, but wait, that's not all. After making sure the malware is able to create the files and store them, it will create registry keys to maintain persistence, meaning it can just sit there dormant and wait for you to trigger it, usually on a Friday afternoon or at a time otherwise signaled through an RDP port. It will assign the victim an ID, encrypt the files, and post a ransom note. So it is all inclusive. Only the best, right, for if you're going to hire this ransomware as a service. So again, just seeing these stories out there, it's a repetitive theme, but it's getting worse, not better. It would be hard pressed to find all the solutions. I think, as mentioned, people, process, and technology are our typical MOs, and I cover those well in a ransomware guide that we will provide to you. In the few minutes that I have left, I guess I'd like to chat with you about 3 solutions, and I'll go through them with a little bit of speed, as they may, you may have some need for it, but these are solutions we find to be pretty effective usage. And I guess the interesting part to me is that in addition to some, well, there's some bad naming in terms of APT, which is a bad thing, and ATP, which is advanced threat protection, which is a good thing on the protection side. And 3 products that oftentimes get confused from Microsoft's side. That said, this family of products that is available can be very effective. And let's kind of move through them quickly. Again, each of these products, while they're cloud-based, is able to impact you for your on-prem Active Directory. Everyone on this phone has an Active Directory, and that is where the keys to your kingdom really are. And so Azure ATP is designed to look at activity that's going on in your domain controller and making sure that you're not having problems. All the problems on the right get exposed through cloud learning, but through your on-prem Active Directory. Okay, and I guess I want to just drive that point home. A second technology called Azure Password Protection, which we've mentioned before, but I thought it would be worth to go through again, is essentially helping your users create better Active Directory passwords by excluding all those things that could be included in common dictionary lists, as well as maybe your own custom banned list, such as your organizational name or your favorite local football team, things of that nature that can be specifically banned. So the goal here is to help users create better passwords. And last but not least, I'd point out we have always offered something called the one-day MFA, which is designed as a proof of concept. The goal here was to simply help you get up and running with multi-factor authentication, which is a very helpful preventative measure for a lot of identity attacks. That said, this same one-day MFA process is oftentimes looked at for cloud usage, but I guess I wanted to point out that with just a little modification, MFA, Azure MFA, as it's pointed in the upper right-hand corner, can be used for VPN and for Active Directory authentications. And so it would be worth a conversation from a solutions perspective to see how that might be employed. So with all of those said, I would just point you to blogs that we'll have. We'll again have this video recap as well as the materials from this advertised on our blog site, and we're typically writing once or twice a week. We certainly have some solutions for you to try out if there's something of particular interest or if you have some specific concerns. If nothing, we'll just simply take you out for coffee and we can certainly have a chat. Appreciate your time, and at this time we can certainly turn off recordings and take any questions with the time remaining.